Welcome back. We're now at lesson 14A. In the next preview assignment and in the next class, you will need to be able to distinguish between sampling error and non-sampling error. So let's start with sampling error. What issues can occur if you do not choose your sample randomly? This is a great time to go ahead and hit pause, work on questions 1 and 2 at least, and maybe keep going with 3, 4, 5, and 6. But hit pause, work on question 1, and then come back and let's walk through some thoughts together. So in question 1, what are some issues that could occur? If one does not choose the sample randomly, then the sample is not going to be representative of the population, and the data that's going to be collected will be useless. So in part 2, or question 2, describe the difference between a population and a sample. So looking at a population first, a population is the entire collection of individuals or things of interest. It is usually not feasible to study all of the people in all of a population because there are just way too many. However, a sample is a smaller group. It looks like an amoeba, but our sample is a smaller group that is a subset of this population. Researchers study samples because they're smaller and they're a whole lot more manageable. So sampling error, make sure you have a card for this or a place on your glossary or Google Doc. A sampling error has occurred when the difference between the estimate based on data from the sample and the true value based on the population is due to the fact that only a subset of the full population is sampled. Well, that's going to happen. But question 3 says, let's look at it a bit more closely. And let's determine if each of the following really describes a sampling error. Go back to what it is. It's occurred when the difference between the estimate, what we calculated with our sample, and the true value from the population is due to the fact that we only used a subset of the real population. And so it says, if so, explain the details of this error, and if it's not an error, describe the potential source of error. So in this one, it says a college student is completing a survey, and the student is asked, do you have difficulty parking on campus? Do you think the college should create more parking spaces? The answer choices are yes or no. The student walks to campus, so she does not have difficulty parking. However, she does see the need for more parking spaces, so she's really unsure on how to answer the question. If you haven't paused and written down your thoughts on this one, you need to. Write down your thoughts and then come back and we'll talk about A, B, and C. Actually, there's D and E on question number 3. So on part A, this really isn't sampling error. The source of this error lies with the fact that there are those in the sample who are not even in the population. In other words, she doesn't even park on campus, but she's in the sample and it doesn't even apply to her. So yes, there's error, but not because of a sampling error. Moving on to B and C. A survey has 110 questions. And at the beginning of the survey, a participant answers the questions very well, but then becomes very tired and just makes up answers for the last 20 questions. Is this sampling error? Well, this isn't either. The source of this error is that the survey itself is not appropriate for its audience. 110 questions is not a good idea for a survey. Part C, a student's trying to find the average height of a high school student. Well, since the student's at basketball practice, he measures the heights of all of the boys on the team. Is this sampling error? Well, we finally found one. This is definitely sampling error. The student did not choose a sample that would accurately represent all of the high school students. The basketball team members may be a bit taller than average, than the average high school student, and only male students are included in the sample, so it is not a representative sample of this school. Part D, a poll taker wants to know if individuals will vote for the Democratic or the Republican presidential candidate in the next election. She visits a country club and asks visitors who they will vote for. So thinking about Part D, this is sampling error. The student did not choose a sample that would accurately represent voters. Country club members may be wealthier than most voters, which would affect their decision-making about voting. Remember, we're trying to get a representative sample of all. So finally on this question, Part E, a poll taker stands in a crowded cafeteria. It's crowded, the college campus, and they ask a random sample of students, so the random's good, whether they have been treated for sexually transmitted disease. Some students do not answer honestly because everyone around them would hear their answers. Is this sampling bias? Well, it's not sampling bias. The sample was chosen randomly. However, the students really may not answer honestly if others can hear them because it might be embarrassing. A few more things that we need to know for the next lesson. One is titled a non-sampling error. And so we just spent a lot of time talking about sampling errors. And now we're shifting it to non-sampling errors. You need to write this down on glossary somewhere, flashcard. A non-sampling error in data collections occurs. It occurs for other reasons besides non-representative sampling. In other words, just because we don't have a representative sample doesn't mean that error can't exist, and we can call it non-sampling error. For example, the wording of questions could cause a non-sampling error. So looking at question 4, a telephone poll taker asked the following question. The economy is doing well and we are at peace. Do you approve of the president's performance? Could this question lead to a non-sampling error? Why or why not? And remember up here it said the wording of our questions could cause a non-sampling error. And the answer is yes. The poll taker has clouded the judgment of the respondents by pointing out positive details and not staying neutral. So the resulting answers may not reflect the respondent's true feelings. You also need to be familiar with bias. Many non-sampling errors, the ones not caused by sampling, trying to get a representative sample, are caused by bias. Here's another word to take note of. Bias occurs when some flaw in a design or some flaw in the implementation of a study results in a tendency for measurements to be too high or too low. And one type of bias is called selection bias. So make sure you note the word bias, note the word selection bias, and note that it occurs when the selected sample is not representative of the population. Question 5, Part A. During World War II, the British lost many bomber planes to anti-aircraft fire. They decided to put more armor on their planes to protect them better. The armor was heavy, so it was decided that it would only be added to the parts of the plane that were most crucial. A study was done. When the planes returned from their bombing runs, the areas of damage were carefully noted. An Austrian mathematician named Abraham Wald looked at the data and told the British that they were about to do the exact opposite of what they should do. Part A. Which planes were not included in the sample? The planes that were not included in the sample were the planes that were shot down. Part B. Was the intended study an example of selection bias? And remember, selection bias is when It occurs when the selected sample is not representative of the entire population, so the entire fleet of the planes. Part B, was the intended study an example of selection bias, why or why not? And yes, the planes that were shot down are not represented in the population, and arguably the planes that were shot down should be in the population. So finally, question 6, and if you haven't hit pause to do the questions before me, make sure that you are hitting pause and doing the questions and then joining me back on the video. But question 6 is, a boss has a special assignment for her teenage employee. The teenager is told to ask 10 people in the mall to fill out questionnaires and then report back with the results. Part A. When the boss looks at the data, she sees that all the questionnaires have been filled out by teenagers. So teenager asked teenagers. Is this sample representative of the entire population at this mall? What possible bias was present? So the answer could be that no, it is not a representative sample of the population. There are a whole lot more of age groups that are not reached by this questionnaire. And the possible reason is that the employee may have felt more comfortable talking to people their own age. However, part B. The next day, the teenager holds up a large sign that says, "Please fill out a questionnaire." Does this sampling method remove, got to be careful with that word, the previous source of bias? So not remove it totally, but remove what was going on previously. And will this sample be representative of the population? Why or why not? Well, in this case, the teenager's bias has been removed. So the teenager picking only teenagers, yes, that has been removed. However, it's really still not a good sampling technique because you're allowing respondents to choose themselves. For example, you might get an overrepresentation of senior citizens because perhaps they've got more free time and they're more willing to stop, fill out a questionnaire, and talk to people. On the other hand, a mother with 3 preschoolers at the mall would not be likely to stop and fill out a questionnaire. Other groups just may be indifferent to the questionnaire. And this completes lesson 14A. Check your syllabus, see if you have more to do. If you do, keep going. If you don't, I'll see you next week.